you have suffered a loss, if somebody has lost a parent and you've lost a parent before, I mean, other than sort of, I think, letting them know that you're with them, it's not really a good time to go like, you know what, I lost my mom, my dad, my personal
I know exactly
story.
what you're going
exactly.
through.
Welcome to TBC Extra, a weekly podcast of our Sunday sermon and a little extra. I am Teresa Jenkins, the communications director here at Topeka Bible Church.
And I'm Jason Brent, the children's pastor at Topeka Bible Church, and we're glad you're here. And now for a little extra.
Hello. Do not try to adjust your TV sets if you're watching on YouTube. Look who's already here.
I'm here early. I just pop by.
Pop in. So, full disclosure, our staff meetings, which happen on the same day as podcast day, traditionally, normally very productive. We get things done. We talk about things. We work out things.
Hopefully.
And
Hopefully.
Always start with
That's
a
the goal.
question. Everyone gets to share. Yeah.
Yes. I'm trying to let people know we don't just get around and sing Kumbaya and talk
Yes.
and
Yeah.
do prayer requests. We actually
do prayer requests.
We do those, but we also we have an agenda in a good way. I am getting way into the weeds. So why is Connor here? Because today we were doing a debrief on the spring potluck, which was Sunday.
Yep.
And it kind of touched off a fun conversation about the foods that were served and some of our favorite potluck traditions and how our faith backgrounds or our childhoods kind of have formed what potlucks should be.
Yes, and they should be great. And they should be grand. And they should be bigger than ever.
And this is why
I get
This is the only way you could get me to come to the podcast earlier. We're going to talk about
pasta salad.
So like,
pasta. Yes.
you do
Pasta
like
salad.
Christmas.
Yes.
But I felt like that
Christmas.
your enthusiasm of downloading from the potluck was almost rivaled with Christmas there.
I get really passionate about food things.
Right.
Yeah. That's why I'm not trying to toot my horn here, but we just had a staff retreat. And one of the reactions that I got back from everybody was, Connor picked some pretty good restaurants.
I am not going to argue with that.
And so I'm just saying what other people have said.
I will say that the restaurants we ate there was probably like the amount of nice restaurants I go to in a year.
Okay.
And so it was awesome. Yeah.
Yes. Tried to plan for people with food restrictions.
I had been to none of the restaurants that we had been to. I hadn't heard about only one.
So anything
and I'm going
with
to one
food.
of them tonight for our anniversary.
Oh, really? Which one is?
Thank you. You've Q39.
Okay.
You opened a whole new world.
Try the pasta salad. Heard it's good.
The poutine is on the list. Super producer Peter
we just
gave us a thumbs
have
up on
so
that.
many discussions about how to improve things that we do, but then oftentimes we have, it's like, how can we? I guess when the question is how to improve a potluck, my question is how can more people bring pasta salad? That's normally
different types of pasta salad.
Different types of pasta
And
salad.
is there different bases of pasta salad? I thought it was all Italian dressing, but right.
Child.
What makes an ideal? Like, we have identified that pasta salad is your love language at a potluck.
It is one of them for sure.
Why I brought like 20 servings of pasta salad, hoping you would get a chance to have some. And
I did.
I didn't care whether it was mine. For you, what makes a good pasta salad? For those of you who want to, maybe we should have a pasta salad cook-off next year for the
jelly
potluck.
beans.
That's a good question.
With jelly beans.
You need to get the right pasta shape. That is critical.
Round.
And what is it?
I think there are a couple that can be good. I'm not a fan of macaroni.
Elbow.
As a pasta. Yeah, I'm not a fan of elbow macaroni.
No
I think
elbow.
penne can be good, but I think penne is really hard unless you're eating it with like you have other things that you can poke with a fork. Right. So like some pasta salads are more like spooned and some are more like with a fork.
This man knows his side dishes.
No, okay. I'm trying to. I usually use a fork.
For instance, let me give you an example
spoon
here.
Pasta salad, yes.
So like, let's say you put like cherry tomatoes in a pasta salad.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Like that. You need kind of a fork to eat cherry tomatoes.
Yes.
Olives.
Yeah, sure. Though I'm
You're not
middle of the
olive.
road. You just you can have some like cucumbers
Greek
are good.
olives, though.
Anyhow, I think you
Cucumbers,
need
okay.
to think about all the elements in the pasta salad being eaten the same kind of way. And I think pasta shape affects that. Also depends what kind of dressing you put on it, because penne does not hold shape or dressing as well as like fusilli.
Fusilli is the what, like tube?
No, I'm thinking of bow tie. Excuse me.
Bow tie.
Like bow tie.
Yes.
That's fusilli.
Okay, thank you.
And then there's what I think next time I make it, I will use the radiatore, which because of its name, it looks like a radiator.
Isn't that a movie?
It's got like all
It's a
the
movie.
different
That's a good one.
area.
That's a good one.
A movie, Ratatouille.
Ratatouille.
Children's minister.
So I think you need to have similar sized things. And then I think that I think meat should be included.
Oh.
I think meat should be included.
Like salami?
Though I'm fine if they don't. I think that it should be included. I think I am not a fan of, here would be my pasta salad hot take. I like cheese, but I dislike cubed Colby Jack cheese in my pasta salad.
How do you feel about Velveeta?
No,
Cubed up?
No cubed cheese at all. That is
like
popular.
feta is a top tier, S tier pasta salad cheese.
So you got crumbles.
But the problem is pasta salad is typically has an oil based kind of dressing in it, and so if you're using like really fatty things like cheese, they need to be sharp. So like sharp cheddar works, pepper jack works.
So it's not about having the big size of cheese.
Well, that's part of it too, because
I
it's
don't really
overwhelming.
Like the big chunks of any kind of cheese in pasta salad.
Yeah.
I like small.
Feta is like sharp. Feta it cuts through things. That's why it's like a Greek salad is great.
With Greek olives, has to have Greek olives, according to me. But
Sure.
whatever, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I had shaved Parmesan, which if I had to do that again,
no, that was fantastic.
It would be the shredded, same kind of substance, the hard parm, but it would be shredded.
Did you have meat in yours?
I actually liked the shaved.
Did you have meat in yours?
No, I will tell you, I cheated. I used 4 boxes of pasta salad mix, but then I added Olive Garden dressing. And the grape tomatoes, I cut those in half. And then the black olives, I got the medium and I cut them just so they wouldn't be so big.
You don't want a huge bite of olives.
No, just
I
a
also
little
think
bit.
cucumbers are a great addition.
That is something I would like to add again. And then I saw on a box, like somebody put broccoli, little bits of broccoli.
I'm okay with that.
That'd be okay.
See, I'm okay with the like non-traditional ones. I think it's more like there are principles. There's a right way and a wrong way to do these things. You have to think about balance. You have to think about how you eat it.
The takeaway for me is the type, what your ingredients should match or equal size ish to the pasta shape. I have not ever thought of that before. That is
wow.
Good.
Yeah.
That is good news.
This is so informative. But guess what's going to be even more informative?
Something about the Bible.
If Connor puts this much thought into pasta salad, imagine how much thought he puts into his sermons.
My friend, this is why his teaching is so solid, because he spends even more time digging into the Bible.
That's
right?
debatable.
Super producer Peter has informed us that we've gone like 27 minutes talking about pasta salad, as should be. So let's go ahead and get in the sermon, and then we'll circle back and we can talk about even more important things.
Good morning. Here we are. It's great to be with you. As we continue here this series, Getting Over It, I'll be honest with you, this morning there's going to be a little bit of a tone shift. I'm going to talk about something that's, I'd say that every single one of us has dealt with, and if we have not yet, we will soon, which is grief. We're going to talk about the grief that comes from, in particular, loss, disease, pain. You can even speak of what happens to our bodies as we age, the breakdown. And this type of grief the message this morning is not intended to say in any capacity that you need to actually get over your grief as it should be gone. So I'm breaking the rules on week 2. But really it's about looking at a story. We're going to be in John chapter 11. A really familiar story. It's the resurrection of Lazarus. And what I want you to see here is the process of what it looks like to grieve well. Looking at Mary and Martha and their interactions with Jesus as he was late to visit their brother who they thought he could heal. And how Mary and Martha really show us what it looks like to process grief in this world that is so broken and that is suffering so much. And in the midst of their pain and loss, the way that they interacted with Jesus. And furthermore, that when they asked those really hard questions, where is God? Why didn't he stop this? Why didn't he show up sooner? Questions I think a lot of us have asked before. That Jesus does not respond with rebuke or correction, but rather he sits with them and he cries with them. And then he displays power that ultimately gives them hope. So we're going to look at John chapter 11 this morning and grief. So quick little preamble before we get to verse 17. Jesus has been told by some people that Mary and Martha sent that Lazarus is very sick and that he is going to die. Now, Jesus is personal friends with this family, with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Those three are siblings. And there are many stories in the Gospels that include all of them. Jesus hung out with them, ate dinner with them, spent a lot of time with them. And so they know him very well. And so he knows Lazarus very well. But as he gets the news that his buddy is on death's doorstep, he chooses to wait instead of going to visit him. And the disciples who are standing around don't understand what's going on. He's sick. Why are you waiting? And Jesus tells them, he says, well, basically Lazarus is going to die, and then I'm going to bring him back, and this is going to give God glory. And so there's this understanding amongst the disciples about what is going to happen before they even travel to the city where Lazarus is at. But Mary and Martha get no such communication. All they know is that they sent word to Jesus, the one who had the power to heal, the one who had done it before, and that he did not show up. And in fact, probably by their thoughts, was a little bit lazy in moving into gear, and really that Lazarus' death is his fault. So we pick up in chapter 11, verse 17, a few days after the funeral. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. So like I said, Jesus is personal friends with Mary and Martha. More than their teacher, more than their savior, he is somebody that they have had fellowship with. If you're familiar with the Bible, there's another popular story with Mary and Martha where they're hosting Jesus, and Martha's kind of the busybody, the one who's getting all the preparations, and Mary is the one who's just sitting at his feet and listening to him, and it sort of helps display their personalities. But they come out here as well. The two sisters, their brother is dead. Jesus, in their mind, could have saved him by coming sooner, and they handle that grief differently. Martha is of the type to go and talk with Jesus. Before he even arrives in the town, she goes out to meet him and has some questions for Jesus. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Martha, even in the midst of great pain, displays an amazing faith in Jesus. He had the power to heal her brother. He currently has power to do something about it. And in the future, he will bring everybody back from the dead. It's quite the statement to make, considering the circumstances. But what's not on her radar is that Jesus is going to bring Lazarus back from the dead that day. What she's talking about is the hope that she has that once all things are said and done, once she and Mary pass away, that in the future, at some undetermined date, Jesus will bring all of them back. And she goes, my hope rests there, right? I understand that this is the truth, but my point is that Lazarus should be alive right now, and he's not. And why is that? And as Martha is asking these questions, I think we can all identify with her in some capacity. Like this aspect of having faith in God and yet realizing that he has not answered your prayers, some of the deepest ones that you've ever prayed, right? I know you can, why didn't you? Is an unbelievably difficult question. In fact, it's almost easier, this is sort of relative, but if somebody doesn't know God at all and they have a view of death and disease and destruction that is completely different, of course they don't have hope in a future resurrection, which ultimately undergirds everything that we believe. But yet at the same time, they aren't asking these kinds of questions. It's, well, why wasn't the doctor effective enough? Why didn't this treatment work? Why did this accident happen? But for those of faith, we often ask these kinds of questions. We go, we believe in a great physician. We trust that he has the power to heal, and yet he didn't, and why not? At some point in their conversation, Jesus questions why Mary has stayed at home. His other friend is conspicuously absent, and so Martha goes to get her. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Right? That same statement of, I'm just going to call it trusting frustration. You have the power to heal, yet you didn't. But Mary's reaction is different than her sister Martha's, right? See, Mary has been with the rest of the crew back at home. Funerals would take a long time, right? And people would be buried very quickly. It is the desert, and so you want to do that sort of thing. And in that, there would be a lot of mourning that was going on at their home and their house. And so we sort of get this image of Mary, who's just 4 days hence after her brother's burial, who is still, understandably, right? Tears are streaming down her face, and there are other people who are mourning with her there, and they see her run out, and then she falls at the feet of Jesus. Mary is mentioned 3 times in the Gospels. There are 3 stories involving Mary, and each of those 3 stories, her position is at the feet of Jesus. That is where she sits and stays. One is to worship, one is to listen, and then in this case, it is to mourn. And I suspect that for all of us in here, assuming we have felt the pain of grief at some point in time, we probably identify with one of these sisters more than the other. Martha represents this sort of intellectual questioning. I mean, the Bible doesn't give tone, but if you go out to meet somebody outside the city who's late and saying, you could have done something about this, I'm imagining a tone there. And then you have Mary, who didn't even go out to see Jesus, right? He didn't come in time. He wasn't here. And so she's sort of retreating. She's back at home and we're crying, right? We're feeling all of the emotions. We're grieving deeply. We're looking for answers, ultimately. But Jesus sees this sight, right? Mary is at his feet crying. He sees her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, and he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. So This phrase, deeply moved in spirit, is one of those that the English doesn't really tell the full story, because in the Greek, what it means is that you are angry or outraged. And we might ask the question, why was Jesus angry or outraged when he was watching Mary weep at his feet? Was it because that was something she shouldn't have done, or because it was inappropriate? No, not at all. Why was Jesus angry? Jesus was angry and outraged. And this is one of those times where it is good to remember that he is fully God, that we have God showing indignity and hatred towards the thing that has brought such grief to his friends. And ultimately, that is sin and the effects of sin, which would be death, right? There is a deep understanding that comes whenever we're trying to walk through these sorts of things in this world, which is the reality that death and disease and pain were not part of God's original design for this world, and that they did not exist in the beginning. If you go way back to Genesis, right, when we're in the Garden of Eden, if you know that story, at the very first, doesn't last long. First 2 chapters, though, there's no pain and death and disease. In fact, Adam and Eve, as it seems to be, would have just continued living forever in fellowship with God. But because of sin and the natural effect of that sin, and by that I mean God as the righteous judge, bringing judgment upon a world that has rebelled against him, one of the things that we see in Genesis 3 that comes out of it, and in fact it is the great evil, not the great evil one, right, who rebelled, Satan, but it is the great evil effect upon this world, which is that death reigns and its shadow spreads over every single thing. It extends in ways that we might not even think of at first hand. Yesterday, we did our We Love Loman Hill work day. If you drive by, a lot of new mulch, looking pretty good. And we were there, for 3 hours pulling weeds, basically. And one of the things that Genesis 3 says that we often don't even think about is that thorns and thistles sprung up out of the earth after sin came upon the world. That even just some of the plants that we now see in our garden and put fertilizer down to get rid of are signs of the fact that we live in a fallen world. And God hates this because this is not his design. This is not his desire that we would be experiencing this, but it is the outcome for every single person, that even though they can trust and hope in a future, right, where there is no more pain and suffering or disease, everybody passes through that door. Every single person has to interact with it at some point in time, and the question is when and how. And so Jesus is angry at the tomb of Lazarus because what has happened to his friend is the universal reality of a world broken by sin, the same thing that he has come to the world to save us from. And yet, even still, what is right in front of him and the corpse that is sitting in this tomb for the last 4 days represents the weight of all of this destruction upon the world. And it makes him so mad. And so as Jesus is looking at this and thinking about these things, the other truth comes to us, which is that Lazarus, if you're familiar with the story, if not, I'm about to spoil it, comes back. But that Lazarus ultimately is going to die again someday. That guy, right? Got to go through death twice. In fact, in John chapter 12, the next chapter where we're at, Jesus and Lazarus are eating dinner together. I would expect your first dinner after coming back from the dead is a pretty great one. But nevertheless, Jesus is grieving here in so many ways that we can't even fathom because he is God. And the fact that Lazarus is going to come back and it will reveal his glory, and ultimately it is a glimpse of God's power in his kingdom to overcome death. When Martha said, right, I believe that you are the resurrection and the life, that is a loaded term That is not just like, you give us good life, or it is great that we follow you, or it makes us feel good, right? This is like, you are the one who has the power over death. Ultimately, that will be shown when Christ brings himself back from the dead, which is an even greater miracle than bringing other people back from the dead, of which Lazarus is not even the only one. But nevertheless, this is a sign of the kingdom of God and the power over death that God has, yet even still, Lazarus is going to die again. And so what we have here is Jesus that is furious at the effects of sin and all of the things that it wreaks upon this world, right? All the havoc that it causes. And then sitting at his feet are Mary and Martha and the mourners who are simply crying, who do not really comprehend all of those things, nor at this point do they really care. Lazarus is dead. And so Jesus begins to cry with them. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" So the crowd around Jesus is trying to pinpoint why it is that he's crying for Lazarus. And their two reasons are false. There are two suggestions. The first one is that he just deeply loved Lazarus so much that he misses him. But in like 10 minutes, Lazarus is coming back from the dead. So it's not that. And furthermore, it's not this question about if he had the power to do it, right? Could he not have done this? Why didn't he? Is he crying because he wasn't able to save Lazarus? Also, 10 minutes, going to prove that one wrong. Jesus is crying because his friends are brokenhearted and he loves them. Jesus is crying because there are those who are mourning and he is mourning with them. Multiple things can be true at once. He can be angry at the effect of sin. He can know that he is about to bring Lazarus back from the dead, and yet he can still desire to comfort and walk with those who are struggling in the midst of their despair. This is Psalm 23. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me, right? It's a reminder that David, not just in Psalm 23, but in Psalm 34 said, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." And so Jesus is walking with them in the midst of this pain. I find that just so interesting, right? Like he knows what's about to happen. He could be just like, hold on. Wait until you see what's coming. But he sits with them in their grief and their despair and their tears. And at some point in time, right, we also have to keep in mind that God is still working out a plan. He has known that he was going to go to Bethany and bring Lazarus back from the dead since before he started walking. He told the disciples, he's like, Lazarus is going to die. I'm going to bring him back from the dead. It's going to show people I'm the Son of God and I have the power over death. But Mary and Martha don't understand all that. They don't get why Lazarus was allowed to die and ultimately why they are going to see him resurrected again. Not yet at this point. Sometimes God is, at all times, God is working out something in the background that we don't always understand. But notice that is also not Jesus' comfort to Mary and Martha. This is just a little rabbit trail. Right now we're talking about grief, but for those of you who are ever walking with somebody else through intense grief, do not try and comfort them by telling them that God has a plan. That is not a comforting measure. It is true, but that is not what grieving people need to hear in the moment, right? If one of the mourners had come up to Mary and Martha and been like, hey, listen, I know this is rough, but God's working out something else that is good for this. They don't care in that moment. And ultimately, it can just cause pain because it brings up these questions that they had where they go, yes, okay, but then what is that plan? All I see is a dead body in a tomb. I don't have any sort of callback here. I don't have any hindsight. I haven't seen how God is going to use this. It is just pain. And so Jesus does what we all should do, which is mourn with those who mourn. Now, at some point, though, with tears still on his cheeks, he begins to move towards the tomb. Jesus, once more deeply moved, it's actually that word for anger again, we have flipped, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" People have long asked why Jesus waited so long to get to the tomb of Lazarus. Like, why not one day? Why really make Mary and Martha just struggle for so long? And one of the possible answers is that he wanted this scenario. He wanted Lazarus to smell. The sign of death to be so present and obvious that there was nobody around who could have looked at him and said, well, he must have woken up, or he wasn't really dead in the first place. There are other examples that we see where Jesus brings people back from the dead, and they had died very recently. And of course, it's not, Jesus is still bringing them back from the dead, but there's crowds around. There are people watching. There's a crowd right now at the tomb of Lazarus. People might have questions, but in his greatest act of resurrection power, until he brings himself back from the dead, Jesus wants there to be, I believe, no question about what is going on. So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." This is such an interesting prayer. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Let's talk about that prayer real quick, right? Pretty unique. Jesus is saying that way back in Bethany, way back where he was at before he arrived in Bethany, when Mary and Martha's sort of messenger had arrived, that he had prayed to the Father at that point in time, and it was already determined and answered as a prayer before he ever started walking to Bethany, or Mary and Martha talked with him, that he was going to bring Lazarus back from the dead. And yet, here he stands in front of the tomb, sort of giving a little, I don't want to say a performance, right? But he is communicating an idea to everybody around him about his connection to the Father, the Son's connection to the Father. This is all part of that glory thing. When he tells the disciples, "It will be for my glory," this is the moment here, right? He is saying that I prayed to the Father, and the Father answered my prayer, and this was able to happen. And I am showing that it was through the power of prayer that these things were taking place, that our connection was established beforehand. And then he displays it. Notice that too. He tells the whole crowd that he's going to bring Lazarus back from the dead, and then he brings Lazarus back from the dead. Not that Jesus ever struggled with faith, but I think it's interesting that the order isn't reversed. Brings Lazarus back from the dead, and then he goes, "I knew that was going to happen," right? And Jesus says, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Let's talk about understatements here, right? Let's talk about, of all the things he could have said, it is just like, go on, like send him, right? Lazarus isn't even like a focus here. We don't even know what Lazarus said. What's his reaction, right? What does he say? He's like, why is everybody gathered around the tomb? What's going on, right? What does Lazarus even think? We don't see him again until the next chapter when he's just eating. They're having dinner together as a family. Jesus and Mary and Martha and Lazarus. But Jesus says, take off the grave clothes, right? He's not dead any longer. He doesn't need to be dressed that way. Go get him some new stuff. It's a reminder of the victory that we have in Christ, and ultimately the victory that God has over death. And when we're talking about processing grief, this has to be your backstop, right? This has to be the thing that we remind ourselves over and over again, is that ultimately there is this victory over death. There is this victory that is coming in the future, of which Mary and Martha and everybody at the tomb got a foretaste of early on. They got to see what's coming in the future just sooner than everybody else. And as that, Jesus displays his power. What we see and God gives us is a glimpse of the kind of hope that we can have. But that still does not really seem to answer a lot of the questions that we have. I go back to Mary and Martha, who asked the exact same question, or rather statement. Lord, if you had been here, this wouldn't have happened. Why do we have to go through this whole thing in the first place? Well, why does somebody need to get stage 2, 3, 4 cancer, go through chemo and radiation, come back from it, live 3 years longer, and then still die? Why did they have to do that? Why did God have to take somebody in this accident? Man, let's talk about children, right? Why? So we have these questions. And so, Lord, you've healed others. Why not me? You have the power. Why are you waiting? But there is an answer. There is an answer, and it doesn't come from running away from the question, but rather it just comes from more deeply engaging. It comes from looking at these things as they are, understanding the reality of the situation, and I'm not trying to make it just a head case sort of thing, but there are truths here that we need to walk through that will make grieving well an easier experience in this world. And the first thing is that we need to put our anger in the right spot. You can be angry. In fact, I'd be a little surprised if you weren't. Death is the worst, and it often comes at the worst times, and watching our loved ones go through it is the worst. It's the worst to watch the family members of those who have lost a loved one go through it. But God is not the one that you should be angry at. He is working something out in the meantime, which we don't fully understand. But part of what is happening in this world is simply the fact that we live in a broken place that is not designed, or it is not really, we're not living out the plan that was originally intended. And part of us understanding that and frankly grasping the need for Christ is recognizing that we live in a fallen world. If every single prayer was answered, if every single question was given its time, if there was a pamphlet that we got when we got the news from the doctor that says this is exactly how it plays out and this is why and this is all of those things, it really undercuts the fact that we live in a sinful world and that we have sinned and that death and disease and destruction have flowed out from that, and we need a Savior. Those things would all be true. All of those things would still be true even if God gives you the pamphlet. But one of the things that wakes us up, frankly, to the fact that we need to trust in God is that things don't look good and that we all experience pain. I once had, I had a woman that came into the church a couple years ago who doesn't go here, just came off the street and had looked us up online. And she had a granddaughter who had some terrible things done to her by a stepfather. And doesn't know me, and in like 2 to 3 minutes is yelling about why would God ever do something like this? How could he? I hate him. And so you're taking all of that in, and then at the same time, lovingly, right? Graciously, patiently going, he is not the one that you should be angry at. If we are talking about the situation with Lazarus, it would be as if Mary and Martha were screaming at Jesus. But picture this instead, is while they are frustrated still, I'm sure, thinking he could have done something, they look over and they see him crying next to them. And I think that that is an image that we don't often consider enough, is what it means that Jesus is crying right next to us in the midst of our pain. He's not the one that you should be angry at. Be angry at Satan. Be angry at sin, both in your life and the lives around us. be angry that we live in a fallen world, God's not the one who deserves it. You can still ask him questions, and that's what we're going to get to next. Go to God with your pain. Let me tell you, there's in the book of Psalms, there are a lot of them, about 150. And in the book of Psalms, there are these songs that are specifically for people who are in mourning. Two examples, though there are many, you can look them up, would be Psalm 13 and Psalm 22. But you probably are more familiar with Psalm 22 because that is the one that Jesus quoted when he was on the cross that begins with, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And I think we forget sometimes, I forget, that God has given us these psalms. They are in his word so that we might read them and understand them and pray through them as people are expressing their frustration and their anguish and their pain before God, right? David is going, my God, why have you forsaken me? God hasn't forsaken David. Not at all. But that's his feeling. That's his emotion. That's what feels very real to him in that moment. And so then God takes that and says, okay, now let's let other people use this. Other people who are feeling the way that David felt when his infant died. Other people who are feeling the way that David felt when Saul was chasing after him. And he was angry with me, and he was doing all of these different things, but yet he prayed to me. But yet he said these words and sought me out. And when you read those psalms, right, these psalms of mourning, they're called properly lament psalms. When you look them up and read them, you'll notice that very few of them are ever just, God, why have you forsaken me? But there's normally this process that they're working through that ultimately brings them to a place where they go, and yet even still, I know that you are good. I know that you are holy. I know that you are working all things out. And so one of the worst things that we could do in the midst of grief is to retreat and walk away from God. Go to him with your pain. And third, remember the promise of victory. This is kind of a loaded one. It's also one of those easier said than done things. That's the easy part of what I do. I just give application and I act like it's the easiest thing to take care of. It's just like, remember the promise of victory. So the victory that we have is something that we have witnessed through Scripture and we have a promise of in the future, and it is hope, right? It is that Jesus returns and that all of the things that we got a glimpse of throughout his ministry, those things are made right and made new. There's no more pain, there's no more suffering, there's no more disease and death. His kingdom is here. When Jesus was here 2,000 years ago, we got little bits of his kingdom that we were made witness to. Lazarus is a great example of that. But as we think of the promise of victory, there's really two ways actually that we can work through this. A bit of a 3A, 3B here. The first one is that individually, we understand the glory that those who have trusted in Christ and have passed on, we understand the glory that they are currently experiencing. When I have the privilege of walking with families through loss, one of my favorite things to say is they're doing a lot better than you are right now, which is true. They're in grief. They are experiencing the destruction of sin. Their family member who trusted in Christ, doing great. And so there is an aspect of this that is really just for those who are left on earth as our loved ones go away. As we say, you know what? They are living in victory. If they've trusted in Jesus, they are doing so good right now, and we can be comforted by that fact. But the other thing that can come from this, right, is when we take that individual perspective and we begin to move it outward. And we begin to use, and this is something that comes with time, right? It's not an immediate thing. I'd be concerned almost if it was an immediate thing. But with time, you begin to look back on your grief and you begin to be able to use that pain to then help other people who are walking through the same thing. It's kind of like your own life becomes a psalm of lament itself. This past Sunday, I'm sorry, I always give so many football references, but Derek Carr is a quarterback for the Saints, and just this past Sunday, he shared that he and his wife had a miscarriage. And he said, I don't just have 4 babies, we have 5. One is in heaven. We have 3 little boys and a little girl, and we'll get to meet the other one when we get to heaven someday. This is what it looks like to trust Jesus to win in the end. This is what it looks like to invite others into that process. I mean, far be it from me to be able to walk up after something that had happened so recently like that and be able to share it with the world. But why is he doing that, right? I'm sure there is an aspect that is helping him in the grieving process. But think about how many people in that audience have also gone through the same thing. And they go, man, okay, his perspective helps me. I can take a little bit of his strength and I can apply that to myself. God has given him the ability to approach this in such a glorifying way. But that also happens when any of us are able to use loss and pain and transform it. And really, as a final statement, that is one of the greatest things that we can do in this world when we experience the greatest evil in this world, which is death, is that you use it in some capacity to help other people who are struggling with it. That you use that story to then walk with others, mourn with those who are mourning, so that their burden is just a little bit lighter. Is part of what God does, that he takes these things that are just horrible in this world and he brings good out of them. That is the business that he is in. So, perhaps a passage to leave you with as we'll go ahead and move into the Lord's table here in a moment as a church. It's a very poignant reminder that as we take the body and the blood of Christ, that what we are doing is we are proclaiming his death until he returns. And so this aspect of communion is remembering over and over again that we do have victory even in death. And so I want to share this with you from Revelation 21. We're going to sit in it for just a moment. I'm going to pray, and then we'll take the Lord's table together. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. That is what is coming. Until that day, we anchor our hope in his victory over sin and death. We find comfort in his promises. And we live with renewed purpose, not to rage against God, who is not the one to blame for pain and death and disease in this world, but rather to hate the sin that has brought such brokenness into this world, and to think through that way the power of Christ's death and resurrection and how it impacts even something like our grief. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you today. I think just about everybody here has walked through some kind of pain in their life. And if not, Lord, it's sadly, it's coming. What a heavy thing to bear. That this world, if we live long enough, will always experience loss. And that frankly, Lord, the longer that you give us on this earth, the more of it we see. It bears witness to a broken world. It bears witness to a world that desperately needs Christ and his promise of victory. God, I ask that you would comfort those who are grieving now as they're working through it, as they are processing it, maybe even in the midst of some of these statements that Mary and Martha said. Lord, I know you have the power, but why didn't you? God, by your Spirit, let them know that you hear those questions and you're not frustrated with them for saying it or asking it, but rather you are crying with them. And in fact, Lord, you are angry that this has even taken place. You hate death. You hate disease. You hate pain. Lord, you hate all of these things that are effects of the fall. And you are bringing beautiful things out of them. But Lord, most of all, you have brought victory in the end to everybody who experiences it. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
We are back in the studio, gentlemen. Connor, thank you. This was a hard thing for a lot of us to process, especially on the day of a spring potluck, but it doesn't matter. It's something that we don't talk about a lot, but almost all of us have walked through some kind of grief journey. And so thank you I imagine you got a lot of interesting feedback and
I hope it was helpful,
Oh, I'm sure. I've heard lots of good stuff. This is the Jesus wept passage was a part of this part that we looked at this week. Are there other times in scripture when we hear about Jesus being moved in that way, by that emotion?
So there's one other passage specifically where it says that Jesus cried, and it's in Luke chapter 19 when Jesus is weeping over Jerusalem, and Jesus is in tears. This is on the road to Calvary, and he's got the cross, and he is crying because of essentially the destruction that Jerusalem is bringing upon herself by rejecting him. Mm-hmm. Now we do find in the book of Hebrews, it says that Jesus would be in sort of like with tears and petitions. I'm getting that language kind of wrong, but basically like with great pleading and tears, that Jesus would offer up prayers, but we don't know exactly what that was, right? But I just think it's good for us to understand the full range of him and his human emotions, and in this case, including like deep sadness. We're often surprised at times by some of his his anger, right, with driving out the money changers from the temple. And it's Jesus wept is usually memorized because it's so easy, though. Good
trivia question.
Well, it's actually not the shortest verse in the New Testament. In
Greek,
there's a shorter one in Greek, but it is the shortest in English.
Okay, my trivia mind needs to know what is the.
Yeah, you're gonna have to put it in the notes. I don't have it in my mind.
Very good. We'll get on that.
They use a preposition in Greek, and so in English it comes out to be multiple words.
Okay.
But anyhow, Jesus wept doesn't have that. Yeah. So I just think it's good to see that Jesus has these deep, deep emotions, but oftentimes they're coming from sadness for others, right? When other people are hurting, that is when he is crying or about to be hurt, if you will.
And just like his impending crucifixion and resurrection, like those weren't surprises to him. He knew that was going to happen. Yeah. The destruction or the bad choices of Jerusalem, like that was not a surprise to him. He knew.
No, and it's one of the things he got in Dutch for is saying that the temple was going to fall. And see, Jerusalem was conquered in AD 70. That's when the temple was destroyed and the ark was taken away and all those different kinds of things to Rome. But Jesus was talking about something that he knew was going to happen.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, and in our narrative from Sunday, you have Martha, right, going out to meet Jesus. And, everyone now and then was familiar with death.
Yeah.
Right? We all know that unless Jesus comes back before we die, we're all going to die an earthly death.
Yeah.
Right. But she's upset, and Jesus responds, well, he will rise. And her response is, well, of course I know in the last days he will rise. Right. And, is that a bad thing to say?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's probably what I would have said.
Yeah.
That if I would have been in her situation. Right. And I do that a lot. I'm not saying it's okay if someone dies, but they have a hope beyond this, right?
Yeah.
But what are some times that the Bible uses the future resurrection as hope in that way? And is that okay?
King David says this when his infant son dies in 2 Samuel 12, He's in great grief and mourning while his son is sick. And then when his son dies, in fact, David's servants are shocked and they're like, why are you not sad anymore? And he's like, he's gone. Basically, I can't do anything about it, and I'll see him again one day.
It was almost like that he was so distraught, right, as his son was dying, that they didn't want to go tell him that he actually had died. And then when they did tell him, he was like, oh, okay. Like, he's going to be okay. Like,
yeah, I think you recognize that it, now your hope becomes something else. Instead of a hope of healing, it becomes a hope of resurrection. And those two things are quite different. In the book of, in Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, this is one of the things that he uses to comfort them for those who have, oftentimes in the New Testament, right, they'll say like people have fallen asleep.
Yeah.
And this is part of the resurrection language that he's like, they're coming back again. They really did die. They aren't literally asleep, but that's what he's talking about. He's like, they're going to come back. And so that's part of his comfort. Keep in mind that when Jesus says it to Martha, though, he's talking about what's about to happen. She takes it to be
totally different.
Totally different.
It's easy to misunderstand that.
Yeah. And I think it kind of leads into this idea that, you know, that's probably not the best thing to say to somebody the moment of, you know, of the funeral is like, well, they're going to come back. You know, I mean, like, we'll see them again one day. Like that's because that's not really what is being mourned per se, is that we're not going to see them again. It's they're not present with us in the moment.
Right.
Yeah. There's a bit of an art to
well,
helping those who are
if you're
grieving.
Jesus and can make them literally come back then you can maybe easier to say
that's
that.
True. That is true.
That's true. If you can do that. Yes. Speaking of comforting people who are right in the middle of their grief, I know that a lot of people will come around during a loss and offer help and be there. But once that funeral has taken place, and the people who are visiting from out of town have gone back home, what are some ways that we can, just practical tips for mourning with those who mourn?
Yeah. I do think it begins sort of at the funeral or when you find out that somebody has passed away. Well, one of the things I mentioned in the sermon is not stating, you know, like this is all part of God's plan. Another thing, again, this is sort of early on, is, you know, a funeral, and like when grief is so raw, that's really not the time to commiserate through shared experiences. So that, you know, if you have suffered a loss, if somebody has lost a parent and you've lost a parent before, I mean, other than sort of, I think, letting them know that you're with them, it's not really a good time to go like, you know what, I lost my, you know, my mom, my dad, my personal
I know exactly what you're going
exactly.
through.
It's not really helpful, even though it's often given with those intentions. And one of the things that it can do, ironically, though it was not mourning at all, when Hannah was pregnant, we just struggled at times with some people coming up and talking about like how difficult their birth stories were. And it's the attempt is love, right?
Yes.
But ultimately it isn't healing or helpful. So that would be another. You know, I think as you move forward in time, we often want to obviously provide help. We want to provide aid. But, you know, Teresa, you had mentioned something that there can be, sometimes we place the burden back on the person.
When we say, just let me know how I can help, that's putting the burden back on them. And I think we should be unafraid. I mean, especially if we know this person pretty well. You know, if it's someone you don't know that well, they're not going to take you up on their offer to come in and scrub their floors. But, you know, bringing them, like, I've tried to pivot to, instead of when can I bring you a meal? Like, I'm going to bring you a meal. Will Tuesday be okay? You know, just love on them in that way, whether it's doing a meal or running errands, or if they have kids, making sure the kids are getting taken to whatever. So that person can really just focus on grief. Rarely it is just the grief of the loss. There's additional responsibility. I think I read when we were doing my dad's service that there's like 10,000 decisions that have to be made when someone dies.
Mm-hmm.
It involves insurance policies and just who's going to take care of this and
death
10,000
certificates
decisions.
Yeah.
You don't need that when you're mourning the loss of a spouse or someone very close to you.
And it makes what would otherwise be very simple decisions that much harder to make.
It does.
And so saying, asking the person like, so do you have a meal train set up? Can you send me the link so that I can go sign up for it? And it's just like that is going to go so far down their priority list, even though, again, that's what's hard about it. So many of these intentions are obviously well meant and well placed, but they end up, even if it's not additional burden, you're not really smoothing the runway for people. So one of the things you can do is sometimes step in and be able to take over sort of activities that are going to be needed. One of those could be a meal train, right? Like, hey, I'm going to go ahead and set this up for you, and then go. I think focusing on yes/no questions, like you said, is really good. It's
That's
like,
really smart.
So if I do 2 weeks, is that going to be good enough for you, or do we need to do 3 weeks?
Yes, I love the yes/no. That is, you are making it as easy as possible for them to participate in the helping. Something else is just the communication when you are visiting. It's fine to bring up the name of the loved one. In fact, it shows that you are honoring their memory.
I mean, though sometimes it feels like we're supposed. To me, at least, I've fallen into that trap of trying to like tiptoe around it or that kind of thing.
Because we don't know what to say.
Right. Yeah. And my family had a significant loss several years ago. My father-in-law, he lived with us, and he lived with, his grandkids, my kids, is my wife's dad, and he was chronically ill. But when he passed away, there was just a lot of things that I didn't really think about. And we went to, so something I didn't know, that Midland Hospice will offer free grief counseling for if your loved one used Midland services. And so I went to a couple sessions with a therapist there. And so I was under the impression that it would be painful or do harm if I showed emotion or cried with my wife, who was crying because she lost her dad. So I was trying to be the strong one, right? And she just kind of pointed out, as like, there's nothing more bonding than showing your true emotions with somebody else and crying with someone. I had never thought of it that way, So, and then another thing that we did as a family is we went through Grief Share, a program at the church, which was really helpful. I think my mother-in-law and my wife and I and our kids all went through the program because they had the kids version at the time. So that was helpful for us. But
when you're talking about communication as well, there's one thing that can be really helpful for people is there's normally a big flurry of activity right around the passing of somebody, but then anybody who's gone through loss recognizes this, but it's just harder to remember for other people, is that oftentimes anniversaries, and by that the one that is definitely included would be a marriage anniversary, but it's more like, hey, it was a month ago today. It was 6 months. This is the first Christmas. This was their birthday. This was, there are a lot of things that there's some that you can never anticipate. It's like, hey, this smelled like my, this dish, and it reminded me of them. We can't anticipate that. But, if you want to really take that next step and be intentional, you can anticipate certain milestones that are probably going to be hard for them. What does it look like for them to walk through this thing without a spouse or a child or a parent for the first time? And just sending them a note of acknowledge, I'm sure this is such a painful time. We're praying for you, and sometimes that can also be after way after the fact is when those more complicated and searching questions like, is there any way that I can help you, can be better received because it's not such an influx of attention at the moment. Sometimes 6 months later, it's like, is there any way that I can help you as you're walking kind of stuff? You have a bit more bandwidth to handle those types of things. So,
inviting them to the Grief Share group and I believe with the Midland one, I think it's available to anyone in the community. I could be wrong.
Is it really?
I think it is. I could be wrong, but a loved one of ours signed up for every single grief group. Like she just needed community right away. And grief share is one of those. And there's a time but everybody's time is different. There's no expiration date on grief. And some people might be ready the next week. And some people, it may be years before they can do that. But just making them aware of it and offering to go to the first session with them. I think our grief share support team really welcome that, especially if this is not their church home.
Right. And something I was really impressed with the grief share program is that you do the teaching part and kind of learn from the Bible how to grieve and just different techniques for grieving, but then you break up into just discussion groups or community groups. But they do have them, like if you lost a spouse, you go to one with spouse. If you lost a uncle or that kind of thing. So there's different groups. So that was really helpful for Angie and I. We were not in the same one as my mother-in-law, who lost her husband. We lost a father, parent. So it was because it looks a little differently, and you share a little differently about that. So,
and quite often the person who leads that group is someone who's been on that journey.
Yeah, and that was very helpful.
So blessed
too.
by leaders. And Grief Share is a nationwide ministry. So if you have a loved one in Spokane who has lost someone, you can look online. They have a group finder there, and you can find a group that meets near them when it's an appropriate time to recommend. What else? Anything else on that?
Maybe the last thing I would say is just, not treating the person. I don't mean this to sound, rude, but like not treating them like a child, in the sense that, not, you want to be transparent in why you're doing something. Nobody ever likes the feeling that somebody is sort of, spending time with them, but not really mentioning the reason why, and just sort of going or doing additional activity that isn't normal for them, or talking to them in a certain way that isn't. And I think people just want to be treated with a sense of normalcy because their life feels so not normal at that moment. And so kind of going like, not that you just bring somebody a casserole and you're like, this is because your loved one died, but that you're just not afraid to. This relates to mentioning their name, but it's just a very honest way to interact with people.
And one way I think you can, it does. And I think one way you can put some meat on that is by asking them starting by saying, I know how much that person loved you, or I know how much that person was so special to you. Can you tell me about how you met, or tell me about
that's a great question.
Things that maybe, even if it came out at the funeral, it's okay to have them repeat it because you were just honoring that relationship. And that's what some folks need during that time.
Yeah. Oh, I do have one last one.
Okay.
Is if the death was a complicated relationship. That occasionally requires a different kind of gloves on it. So many of the things we just talked about still apply, but there's sometimes an additional layer of understanding that you might need to have in order to make like that anniversary letter or that Christmas letter or that parent, whatever thing, that relationship, that you are not, that you're still acknowledging the passing, but sometimes there's greater context that truly close friends can provide. So I suppose my last thing here is just sometimes context does matter. Frankly, sometimes the way somebody passed away matters, and how you relate to them. Was it unexpected? Were they older? Were they young? All these different things. But that would maybe be the last thing. I remember I had a great uncle who killed himself, and he was Catholic, and that was a very awkward funeral. And I just remember feeling weird. I was really young, but I remember feeling weird just because of this sort of like unspoken thing that was being communicated in the space that we were in, and the way that people were talking to us and handling us. And it felt just kind of yucky. And so I think that trying to understand being empathetic enough to sort of go into how might somebody be uniquely dealing with their death beyond just the fact that somebody is missing can be helpful to future conversations. But that's the last one I have.
Yeah. A passing due to suicide changes so many facets.
Kind of the calculus there.
Yeah. So. Or like you said, complicated relationships. Yeah.
You know, you got at the end of the sermon or middle end, the application part, the first one was that having your anger in the right place.
Sure.
And I've been in times when I've had that knee-jerk reaction, like I'm angry, yes, but even angry at God, not just at the situation or that kind of thing. And in counseling situations, I've had trouble knowing what to do or say to people if they're just like, I'm really angry at God. God's in control of everything and he didn't, or whatever.
Yeah.
What kind of things would be helpful in that situation if someone is really angry at God?
Good question.
Do you ever do the big egg toss game?
Like you throw an egg and then take a step back and throw it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So you know how like when you get really far away, you've got to, and the egg comes down, you've got to move with it a little bit. But within the span of about 3 feet, it comes to a stop, right? You just can't have a hard hand. That I think there's a bit of that. So you are working with somebody, you're affirming the fact that their anger in many cases is righteous. That's a broad statement, but like in many cases, the fact that they are angry in general that somebody has died with a proper context is the appropriate emotion to have, right? Jesus was angry. And so like there's momentum there that can be helpful. And you kind of need to, I think, walk with that a little bit and not just immediately put up the fences like, you can't be angry. This is, they're getting all that stuff. But yeah, then there is that. And depending on how intense those emotions are, it's a slower process, but you are moving them away from their anger towards God. And it's not about saying, those aren't the right questions to ask, but it is about helping them to just refocus, kind of like I was saying, but it's just more a matter of the speed with which you go. That's not like a one-time conversation. And sometimes it's degrees of shifting. Sometimes the anger can be directed not at God, but at the one who is deceased.
Sure.
So, somebody overdosed, right? And they begin to just be really angry at the person. And it's another kind of thing, like we're angry that this thing has happened and it is, and it's sin and it's death and it's disease and destruction and all of this pain. And so I would be worried if somebody was walking through that and was just like, oh, okay.
Right.
Like that's unhealthy if you have no strong emotion towards death. But yeah, like what does it look like? And perhaps the diagnostic questions there are sort of like, what is it that we're really angry at? And ultimately, if somebody has a relationship with God, otherwise it's a gospel opportunity. It's like, okay, so yes, you're mad at, okay, so God allowed this thing. Who perpetrated it? What was behind that? Who is ultimately in favor of that kind of evil or that hard thing or whatever? Or even just if it's not a person, but it's a thing like cancer, representing like, okay, so where, You get down to this point where it goes sin. And sin and death itself are this thing that exists. And God, this is kind of the flip, is God's whole purpose is redeeming the world from sin and death. And so you can still ask those questions, but if you get what I'm saying. So
like you said, it's not something that we sit down with a piece of paper and draw out in one sitting.
Yeah.
Like this is something like anger. I know the 7 stages of grief. Is that what it is? 7 stages? That is not, it's not in the Bible.
Yeah.
But I mean, anger is one of those stages. And it's okay to hang out there for a little bit because it's natural and it has to happen in some cases, but then that's part of that, hanging on to it and kind of giving it that shock absorption to get through.
The 4th week in this series and getting over it, we'll talk about bitterness.
Oh, good.
And kind of how that, if anger is manifested long enough, that it can become bitterness, and that's definitely what you want to avoid. And there's a time element to it as well. It's not the time during the funeral to go and talk with the parent who lost a child and just be like, so you're angry. I mean, that's so inappropriate. People need to be able to process those things, but there is a time when that conversation can take place.
Absolutely. Wow. Heavy stuff. What's anything else on grief?
Good.
Okay. What's coming up this week?
Anxiety.
Ooh, wow.
I've got anxiety.
A little anxious about that.
Yeah.
Can't wait to hear more and be back here next week as we dig into that sermon. We hope you will join us then. Have a wonderful week. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to the TBC Extra Podcast. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.